The wagon rattled over the dusty Montana trail, each bump sending 16-year-old Emma Carter closer to a fate she never chose. Beside her sat Pastor McKinley, silent as stone, while her father's last words echoed in her mind. "You'll do your duty to this family, girl. Your sister's children need a mother." 3 weeks ago, her sister Margaret had died bringing her fourth child into the world. The baby survived. Margaret did not. And now Emma was being sent to the Dawson Ranch to marry Thomas Dawson, a man she'd met exactly twice, a man 20 years her senior, a man who'd been her sister's husband. The Dawson Ranch sprawled across the valley like a scar on the earth. Weathered buildings, endless fences, and silence so thick you could choke on it. When the wagon stopped, 3 small faces peered from the cabin window. Margaret's children. Emma's nieces and nephew. Thomas Dawson stepped onto the porch. Tall, lean, with eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to see anything but work and loss. He didn't smile, didn't welcome her, just nodded once and said, "Supper's at 6. Children sleep by 8. The wedding happened the next morning, 5 minutes before a circuit judge. No flowers, no music, no joy. Just legal words that bound her to this stranger and his grief-soaked land. Emma learned quickly that Thomas Dawson was 2 different men. To the town, he was respectable, a hard worker, a churchgoer, a man dealt a cruel hand by fate. But in the cabin, after the children slept, he became something else. Not violent, worse, absent. He'd sit in Margaret's rocking chair for hours, staring at nothing, sometimes whispering her name. The children were wild with grief and confusion. 7-year-old Samuel threw plates. 5-year-old Ruth wouldn't speak. 3-year-old Clara cried for her mama every night. And the baby, sweet little Grace, had colic that kept the whole house awake. Emma was drowning. She'd gone from being the youngest in her own family to sole caretaker of 4 traumatized children and a ghost of a husband. She'd cry while kneading bread, pray while scrubbing floors, and wonder if this was all her life would ever be. It was 6 weeks into the marriage when Emma found the letters. She'd been cleaning the bedroom, Thomas's bedroom, not theirs. He'd never once asked her to share it, when a loose floorboard caught her broom. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of envelopes. Her hands shook as she read them. They were letters from Margaret to Thomas, written during their courtship. But it was the last letter, dated just days before Margaret died, that made Emma's blood run cold. "Thomas, I must tell you the truth before this baby comes. I am afraid, not of childbirth, but of what I've done. The baby—" The letter ended there, unfinished, as if Margaret had died before she could complete her confession. Emma's mind raced. What truth? What had Margaret done? Emma started paying attention. In town, she'd catch fragments of conversation that stopped when she approached. The general store owner's wife would exchange knowing glances with the school teacher. The blacksmith once muttered something about Dawson getting what he deserved. Then one afternoon, old Mrs. Henshaw, half blind and fully honest, grabbed Emma's wrist at the church social. "You poor child," she wheezed, "sent here to clean up Margaret's mess. Does he even know you know?" "Know what?" Emma whispered. Mrs. Henshaw's cloudy eyes went wide. "Lord have mercy, you don't know." That night, Emma confronted Thomas. She laid the unfinished letter on the table between them. His face went white, then red, then collapsed into something that looked like relief. "You found it," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for someone to find it." The truth spilled out like poison from a wound. Margaret had been in love with another man before marrying Thomas, a ranch hand named James Wheeler who drifted through town. Thomas had been the stable choice, the respectable choice. Margaret had chosen duty over love. But James had come back. 2 years into the marriage, he'd returned, working at a neighboring ranch. And Margaret, lonely, resentful, full of regret, had met with him, once, maybe twice. Baby Grace, Thomas believed, might not be his daughter. "I couldn't look at that child without wondering," Thomas said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I couldn't look at any of them without seeing her betrayal. And then she died, and I couldn't even hate her properly because everyone expected me to grieve." "So you sent for me," Emma whispered. "Not to mother the children, to punish Margaret's memory." "No." Thomas looked up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he truly saw her. "I sent for you because I was drowning, and your father offered a rope. I didn't think about what it meant for you. I couldn't do it alone anymore." Emma could have left, should have left. She was 16 years old, trapped in a marriage built on grief and suspicion and duty. But she looked at those 4 children, Samuel's anger, Ruth's silence, Clara's tears, and Grace's innocent smile, and she understood something that none of the adults in her life had considered. These children didn't need a replacement for Margaret. They needed someone who chose them. "Here's what's going to happen," Emma said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "You're going to be a father to those children, all 4 of them. I don't care whose blood runs in Grace's veins. She's yours because Margaret was your wife, and she needs you." Thomas started to protest, but Emma cut him off. "And you're going to stop living in Margaret's ghost. I'm not her. I'll never be her. But I'm here, and I'm real, and those children need us to be better than our grief." It didn't change overnight. Healing never does. But slowly, the Dawson Ranch began to breathe again. Thomas started coming home before dark. He taught Samuel to rope cattle and let Ruth help with the horses. He rocked Clara to sleep and sang to baby Grace. Sang like a man letting go of questions that had no good answers. And Emma? She grew up fast, but not in the way her father intended. She became not a replacement wife, but something fiercer. A woman who refused to be defined by other people's choices. 6 months after the wedding, Emma was at the general store when she overheard 2 ranch wives gossiping. "Shame about young Emma Carter, married off like cattle." Emma turned around. "Emma Dawson," she corrected firmly. "And there's no shame in choosing to stay when you could have run. That's not weakness, that's strength." A year later, James Wheeler came back to town. The whole town held its breath, waiting for scandal, for confrontation, for the truth about Grace's parentage to explode into the open. Instead, Emma invited him to Sunday dinner. Thomas nearly refused, but Emma insisted. "We're putting this to rest," she said, "today." James Wheeler sat at their table, awkward and aged beyond his years. He looked at baby Grace, now a toddler, and Emma saw the question in his eyes. "She has Margaret's smile," James said quietly. "She has Thomas's stubbornness and Samuel's sense of humor, and her own spirit that belongs to nobody but herself." Then Emma did something that shocked everyone. She thanked James Wheeler. "Margaret loved you. I don't know if what happened between you was right or wrong, and honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. But loving you taught her what it felt like to choose something for herself. And maybe that's why she fought so hard to bring Grace into this world, because Grace was her last choice, her last piece of autonomy." She turned to Thomas. "Grace is ours, not because of blood, because we choose her every single day." James Wheeler left town the next morning and never came back. Years later, when Emma was 25 with two more children of her own, a traveling journalist came through town working on a story about women in the West. "I heard you were married at 16 to your late sister's husband," the journalist said. "That must have been a terrible fate." Emma looked out at the ranch, at Thomas teaching their sons to ride, at the older children now nearly grown, at Grace chasing chickens with fierce concentration. "It wasn't a fate," Emma said. "It started as one, but I learned something important. You can be handed a story you didn't choose and still decide how it ends." "And how does your story end?" the journalist asked. Emma smiled. "It doesn't. It just keeps going. And every day I choose it." The truth that left everyone speechless wasn't about scandal or secret parentage or forbidden love. It was this: a 16-year-old girl, given no choice, had chosen anyway. She'd chosen those children, chosen that broken man, chosen that hard life, not because she had to, but because she discovered that real strength isn't in the hand you're dealt. It's in how you play it. And Emma Dawson played her hand like a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay, transform, and refuse to be anyone's victim, even your own. The Montana winter came early that year, howling down from the mountains like God's own fury. Snow piled against the cabin walls until the windows looked out onto white nothingness. The ranch became an island, cut off from town for weeks at a time. It was during this isolation that Emma truly understood what she'd committed herself to. Thomas had 40 head of cattle to keep alive through the storms. He'd leave before dawn, wrapped in so many layers he looked twice his size, and sometimes wouldn't return until after dark. Emma would stand at the window, baby Grace on her hip, watching the whiteness and wondering if this would be the day he didn't come back. Samuel, now 8, tried to be the man of the house in his father's absence. He'd check the wood pile, fetch water from the punk before it froze, and watch over his sisters with an intensity that broke Emma's heart. He was too young to carry such weight. One particularly brutal night, Thomas didn't come home. Emma waited until the children were asleep, then wrapped herself in every blanket she could find and lit every lamp in the cabin, a beacon in the darkness. She prayed words she didn't know she remembered, bargained with a God she wasn't sure was listening. Thomas stumbled through the door near midnight, half frozen, his face cut from ice and wind. 2 calves had gotten separated from the herd. He'd found them, saved them, nearly died doing it. Emma didn't scold him. She just sat him by the fire, pulled off his frozen boots, and rubbed feeling back into his feet until he could wiggle his toes. Neither of them spoke, but something shifted between them that night, a recognition that they were in this together, for better or worse, and worse could kill them both. In late January, the mail finally came through. Among the seed catalogs and ranch supply notices was a letter from Emma's mother. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it. She hadn't heard from her family since the wedding. Part of her had hoped they'd write to check on her, to see if she was surviving. Another part knew better. Dearest Emma, your father says I mustn't write, but a mother's heart cannot be silent. Your sister Caroline is to be married in the spring, a lawyer's son from Helena, very respectable. She's so happy, Emma, the way a bride should be. I pray you've found some measure of contentment in your circumstances. We did what we thought was right. Margaret's children needed you. Thomas Dawson needed you. Duty is its own reward, though I know it doesn't always feel that way. Your father says you may visit after the spring thaw, if Mr. Dawson can spare you, though he also says married women belong with their husbands, not running home to their mothers. Be good, Emma. Be grateful. Your loving mother. Emma read the letter 3 times, then fed it to the fire. Thomas looked up from his ledger. Bad news from home? No, Anna said. Just a reminder that home isn't there anymore." She didn't cry. She was done crying about things she couldn't change. Ruth hadn't spoken a complete sentence since her mother died. She'd nod, shake her head, sometimes whisper a single word. The doctor in town said it was grief, that she'd speak when she was ready. But Emma worried. Ruth was 6 now, and her silence had become a wall between her and the world. It was a Tuesday morning, unseasonably warm for February, when everything changed. Emma was teaching the children their letters at the kitchen table. Samuel was reading aloud from a McGuffey reader. Clara was tracing the alphabet with her finger. Grace was chewing on a wooden block, and Ruth sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. Then, without warning, Ruth said, "Mama used to cry at night." The room went silent. Samuel dropped his book. Emma's heart stopped. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Emma asked gently. Ruth's eyes focused on Emma for the first time in months. "Mama used to cry at night. After Papa went to sleep, I could hear her through the wall. She'd say, 'I'm sorry,' over and over. I thought she was sad because she was sick." Ruth's small voice grew stronger. But she wasn't sick yet. She was sad before the baby came. She was sad for a long time. Emma reached across the table and took Ruth's small hand. "Your mama loved you very much." "I know," Ruth said simply. "But she was sad anyway. People can love you and still be sad, can't they?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "Yes, they can." "Are you sad, Aunt Emma?" Emma considered lying. Instead, she told the truth. "Sometimes, but less than I used to be." Ruth nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she picked up her primer and began reading aloud, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. She didn't stop talking after that day. It was as if speaking that one truth had unlocked something inside her. That evening, after the children were asleep, Emma told Thomas what Ruth had said. He sat in silence for a long time, then said, "I knew she was unhappy. I thought if I worked harder, provided more, it would be enough. But you can't work your way out of someone else's unhappiness." "No," I agreed. "You can't." "I'm trying not to make the same mistake with you." Emma looked at him. Really looked at him. He'd aged 10 years in the past few months, but there was something different in his eyes now. Less haunted, more present. "Then stop treating me like I'm going to disappear. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere." That spring, a new family moved onto the abandoned Mercer property 5 miles north. The Rutherfords had come from Ohio, a father, mother, and their 20-year-old son, David. David Rutherford was everything Thomas Dawson wasn't. Young, educated, full of optimism and Eastern manners. He'd read books Emma had only heard of. He talked about art and music and ideas. And he looked at Emma like she was something more than a child bride or a replacement mother. The first time they met was at a barn raising. David approached her while she was setting out food, tipped his hat, and said, "You must be Mrs. Dawson. My mother says you're the youngest ranch wife in the valley." "I am," Emma said, neither proud nor ashamed of the fact. "Does it ever feel strange, being married so young?" Most people danced around the topic. David's directness caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted, "but most days I'm too busy to think about it." "That sounds lonely." Emma looked at him sharply. "I have 4 children and a husband. I'm never alone." "That's not the same as not being lonely." He was right, and Emma hated that he was right. She made an excuse and walked away, feeling Thomas's eyes on her from across the barn. That night, Thomas said, "The Rutherford boy was talking to you for a long time. He was being polite. He was being interested." Emma set down the plate she was washing. "Thomas, are we really going to do this? Are you going to see ghosts in every conversation I have? I'm not... He stopped, exhaled. You're right. I'm sorry. Old fears die hard. Then bury them, Emma said, because I won't live in Margaret's shadow, and I won't be punished for her choices. As spring turned to summer, Emma began to claim small pieces of herself. She started a garden, not the practical vegetable garden Thomas maintained, but a flower garden. Wildflowers she transplanted from the meadow, seeds she traded for at the general store. Thomas thought it was frivolous, but he didn't stop her. She taught herself to ride properly, not just sitting side saddle for church, but actually riding, astride through the open range, wind in her hair. The first time Thomas saw her racing across the valley on his old mare, he nearly had apoplexy. But Samuel was with her, laughing and keeping pace, and Thomas couldn't argue with the joy on his son's face. She began attending the women's literary circle in town, leaving Thomas to manage the children for 2 hours every Thursday afternoon. The first time she announced this, Thomas looked panicked. "What am I supposed to do with them?" he asked. "Be their father," Emma said. "You'll figure it out." She came home to find the kitchen covered in flour, Clara wearing a pot as a hat, Grace finger-painting the table with applesauce, and Thomas looking exhausted but oddly proud. "We made biscuits," he announced. They were inedible. Emma had never been happier. But life on a Montana ranch is never easy for long. By late July, it became clear the summer rains weren't coming. The creek that ran through the Dawson property slowed to a trickle. The grass turned brown, the cattle grew lean. Thomas became a man possessed, working 18-hour days to keep the herd alive. He dug new wells, hauled water from the distant river, negotiated with neighbors for access to their springs. Emma watched him literally work himself sick. He'd come home, collapse into bed still wearing his boots, and be gone again before dawn. "You're going to kill yourself," she told him. "If I don't save the herd, we'll lose everything," he said. "The children need a father more than they need cattle." But Thomas couldn't stop. It was as if every animal he saved proved he wasn't a failure, wasn't the man whose wife had died unhappy, wasn't the man who needed his wife's younger sister to rescue his family. Then, one August afternoon, Thomas collapsed in the north pasture. Samuel, who had been helping him, rode home at a gallop, screaming for Emma. She and 2 neighboring ranchers brought Thomas home in a wagon, his skin fever-hot, his breathing shallow. The doctor came from town. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, complete physical breakdown. "He needs rest," he said. "Complete rest. A week at minimum." "We can't afford a week," Thomas mumbled from the bed. "The cattle." "I'll handle it," Emma said. Thomas tried to sit up. "You can't." "Watch me." Emma Dawson shocked everyone, including herself, over the next 2 weeks. She organized the neighboring ranchers into a cooperative water-sharing system. She negotiated with the banker in town for an emergency loan. She hired 2 temporary hands to help with the heaviest work. But more than that, she went out herself. At 16, nearly 17 now, she worked alongside the ranch hands, hauling water, tending cattle, fixing fences. Her hands blistered and bled. Her face burned brown under the sun. She lost weight she didn't have to lose, but she saved the herd. Thomas, forced to rest, watched from the porch as his teenage wife became a rancher in her own right. He watched her command respect from men twice her age. He watched her make decisions he would have made, sometimes better ones. When he was finally strong enough to work again, he found Emma in the barn at sunset, treating a calf for screwworm. "You saved us," he said simply. Emma didn't look up from her work. "We're partners, aren't we? That's what partners do." "Emma," his voice made her pause. "I haven't been fair to you. I married you thinking you were a solution to my problems, but you're not a solution. You're a person, a remarkable person." Emma set down her tools and finally met his eyes. "I'm not remarkable. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes you remarkable." For the first time since their wedding day, Thomas reached for her hand. Not out of obligation or formality, but as a genuine gesture of partnership and respect. Emma took it. The town's annual harvest dance was the social event of the year. Emma had missed it the previous year, too new to the marriage and too overwhelmed to consider attending. This year, Thomas surprised her by saying they should go. "All of us?" Emma asked, looking at the 4 children. "All of us," Thomas confirmed. The Hendersons said their daughters would watch the younger ones during the dancing. Samuel's old enough to feel important, Ruth could use the music, and Clara will love the dessert table. Emma realized what he was really saying. He wanted to be seen with her, as his wife, as a family. The night of the dance, Emma wore the one good dress she owned, a blue calico she'd altered from one of Margaret's old gowns. It wasn't fancy, but it fit her properly now, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a girl playing dress-up, but a young woman who'd earned her place. The dance was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with late summer wildflowers and lit by dozens of candles. The whole valley was there, ranchers and their wives, merchants, the few professional men, everyone who made up their small community. Emma felt the eyes on her the moment they arrived, the whispers. "That's the young Mrs. Dawson, married at 16, took over the ranch when Thomas took ill. Not sure if it's proper, but you can't argue with results." David Rutherford approached almost immediately. "Mrs. Dawson, would you honor me with a dance?" Before Emma could respond, Thomas stepped forward. "The first dance is mine," he said, not aggressively, but firmly. He led Emma to the floor as the fiddle struck up a waltz. Emma had never danced with Thomas. At their wedding, there'd been no celebration. She'd assumed he didn't dance, or wouldn't want to with her. But he placed his hand at her waist, took her hand in his, and proved her wrong. "You're full of surprises," she said. "I had a life before grief. I'm trying to remember how to live it again." They danced 3 dances before Emma allowed David his turn. And yes, David was more graceful, more cultured, more her age. But when the music ended, Emma found herself looking for Thomas across the room. That night, after they'd returned home and put the exhausted children to bed, Thomas did something he'd never done before. He kissed Emma goodnight. Not passionately, they weren't there yet, might never be, but gently, on the forehead, like a promise of something growing between them. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a reason to remember how to dance." In early September, Emma received word that her sister Caroline and her new husband would be stopping through on their way to their new home in Wyoming. Emma's feelings were complicated. Caroline had everything Emma had been denied: a proper courtship, a wedding of her own choosing, a husband her own age. Yet Emma found she wasn't entirely jealous. Her life was harder, yes, but it was hers in a way Caroline's perfectly arranged existence could never be. Caroline arrived in a fancy carriage, wearing city clothes and carrying herself like someone who'd never touched a dish rag. Her husband, Lawrence, was indeed a lawyer, polished, proper, and completely out of place on a working ranch. "Oh, Emma," Caroline said, looking around the cabin with barely concealed horror, "you live here?" "I do," Emma said calmly. "But it's so rustic. And the children, 4 of them. However do you manage?" "The same way anyone manages, one day at a time." Caroline lowered her voice. "Mama told me about your situation. It must be dreadful being married to your late sister's husband. Everyone knows why Father arranged it." "Do they?" Emma set down the coffee pot with deliberate care. "And what do they think they know?" "That you were sacrificed for duty, that poor Thomas needed someone to care for his children, and you were the convenient choice. Emma looked at her sister, pretty, pampered Caroline, who understood nothing about the world beyond drawing rooms and tea services. "You're right," Emma said. "I was chosen out of convenience. But you know what I've learned, Caroline? How you begin doesn't determine how you continue. I may have come here as a solution to someone else's problem, but I've become the author of my own life." "But don't you resent it? Don't you wish you had what I have?" "I thought about this honestly. Sometimes," she admitted, "but not as often as you'd think. You have ease, Caroline. I have strength. You have comfort. I have purpose. Neither is better or worse. They're just different." Lawrence interrupted, condescending in every syllable. "My dear sister-in-law, surely you don't mean to suggest you're happy in such primitive circumstances." Before Emma could answer, Thomas came in from the barn, work-worn and real. "Mr. Lawrence," Thomas said, shaking the lawyer's soft hand with his calloused one, "welcome to our home. I hope you'll excuse the primitive circumstances, but we find them quite sufficient for raising children, building a life, and learning what actually matters." Emma had never loved him more in that moment. Caroline and Lawrence left the next morning, clearly relieved to escape to civilization. As their carriage pulled away, Thomas slipped his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Your sister's very—" He searched for a diplomatic word. "Spoiled," Emma offered. "I was going to say different." "That too." Emma leaned into him slightly. "Thank you for what you said. I meant every word." But married life, even one built on growing respect, isn't without conflict. In October, Thomas made a major financial decision without consulting Emma, buying a neighboring property that had come up for sale. It was a good investment, but it drained their reserves and put them in debt. Emma found out when the banker mentioned it in passing at the town store. She walked home in a cold fury. "You bought the Morrison section," she said when Thomas came in for supper. "I did. It's good grazing land, access to—" "Without telling me." Thomas set down his hat. "It's ranch business. I saved this ranch when you were too sick to stand. I negotiated with the bankers, managed the hands, made decisions that kept us solvent, and you don't think ranch business is my business? That's not what I— Then what? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're perfectly happy to rely on me when it's convenient, but when it comes to actual partnership, I'm still just the child bride you sent for." Thomas's face reddened. "That's not fair. Neither is finding out about a decision that affects my life from the town banker." They stood there, anger crackling between them like lightning. Finally, Thomas said, "You're right." Emma blinked. "What?" "You're right. I should have consulted you. I'm so used to making decisions alone that I—" He ran his hand through his hair. "I'm used to being the only adult in the room. But you're not a child anymore. Maybe you never really were." "I'm 17, Emma said. "I run your household, raise your children, manage your ranch when you can't. When exactly was I going to be old enough to be consulted?" "From now on," Thomas said firmly, "from this moment forward, we make decisions together, true partners. I promise. And if you forget, then you remind me, loudly if necessary." Emma felt her anger deflate. "The Morrison property is good land." "It is. But you paid too much for it." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "How do you know?" "Because I pay attention, and because I've been talking to the other ranch wives. We know more about land values than you men think we do." Despite himself, Thomas smiled. "Lord help me, I married a businesswoman." "No," Emma corrected. "You married a partner. It's about time you started treating her like one." Grace turned 1 in November, a milestone that brought mixed emotions for everyone. Thomas had been dreading this day for months, the reminder of Margaret's death, the question of Grace's parentage that still haunted his quieter moments. But Emma was determined to celebrate. She baked a cake, invited the neighboring families, and decorated the cabin with paper chains the children had made. She dressed Grace in a new white dress she'd sewn herself. When Thomas saw the preparations, he pulled Emma aside. "Is this necessary?" "Yes," Emma said firmly. "That little girl deserves to be celebrated. She didn't ask to be born into complicated circumstances. She's innocent of all the adult drama around her." "But people will talk." "People always talk. Let them. We're celebrating our daughter." Our daughter. The words hung between them. Thomas realized Emma wasn't asking him to forget the past or ignore his doubts. She was asking him to choose Grace despite them. The party was chaotic and joyful. Grace smashed her cake with both fists, making everyone laugh. Samuel proudly showed off how his baby sister could clap on command. Ruth sang a little song she'd made up. Clara gave Grace a much too enthusiastic hug that nearly toppled them both. Thomas watched it all with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. That night, after everyone had gone and the children were asleep, Thomas went to Grace's cradle. Emma watched from the doorway as he picked up the sleeping toddler, held her close, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let my hurt keep me from you." Grace stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled at him, that pure, trusting smile babies reserve for the people they love. Something broke open in Thomas's face. He kissed Grace's forehead and said, "My daughter, mine." Emma didn't intrude on the moment. She simply went to bed, grateful that one more ghost had been laid to rest.
The second winter was different from the first. This time, when Thomas went out to tend the herd, Emma went with him. They worked as a team, anticipating each other's movements, covering each other's weaknesses. This time, the cabin felt like a home rather than a way station. Emma had made curtains, added rugs, arranged the space to reflect her own taste rather than Margaret's ghost. This time, when they sat by the fire after the children were asleep, they talked. About their days, about their hopes, about the ranch's future. Sometimes they disagreed. Often they didn't, but they communicated. And this time, when the worst blizzard of the season trapped them inside for 3 days, it felt less like imprisonment and more like an unexpected gift. Time together without the constant demands of ranch work. During that blizzard, something shifted between Emma and Thomas. It happened gradually, then suddenly. The way ice melts in spring. They were sitting by the fire, Emma mending, Thomas working on the ranch ledgers, when he said, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Margaret hadn't died?" Emma considered. "Sometimes. I'd probably still be at my parents' house, helping with the younger children, waiting to be married off to someone else's convenience." "You say that like this isn't any different." "It started the same," Emma said carefully, "but it became different. I chose to stay. I chose to make this work. That makes all the difference." "What if you'd had a choice from the beginning?" Emma set down her mending. "Thomas, what are you really asking?" He closed the ledger. "I'm asking if you'd choose this, choose me, if you could go back and decide for yourself." It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him. This man who'd lost his first wife to death in secrets, asking his second wife if she'd choose him voluntarily. Emma thought about lying, about offering easy comfort. Instead, she told the truth. "I don't know. That 16-year-old girl, I can't speak for her. She didn't have enough life in her to know what she wanted. But this 17-year-old woman, the one sitting here now?" She met his eyes. "Yes, I'd choose this. I'd choose you." Thomas crossed the small room and sat beside her on the settee.
"I don't deserve you."
"Probably not," Emma said with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway."
"Emma," his voice was rough, "may I?" Would it be all right if I... He was asking permission to kiss her, really kiss her. Not the chaste goodnight pecks they'd shared, but something more. Yes, Emma whispered. When Thomas kissed her, it was gentle and uncertain. Two people learning each other for the first time. Emma's heart raced, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being wanted, not just needed. They sat together by the fire long after the kiss ended, Emma's head on Thomas's shoulder, his arm around her waist, listening to the wind howl outside and feeling, for the first time, completely sheltered. By the time Emma turned 18 that spring, the ranch had become profitable again. The Morrison property had proven to be a good investment after all. The herd had survived another winter. The children were thriving. But Emma herself had changed most of all. She was no longer the frightened teenager who'd arrived in the wagon 2 years ago. She'd become a woman of capability and confidence, respected by the neighboring ranchers, loved by her children, and increasingly cherished by her husband. Thomas Rutherford came to say goodbye that April. His family was moving back east. The ranching life hadn't suited them. "I keep thinking about what might have been," David said to Emma as they stood by the fence. "If you'd been free when we met." Emma was neither flattered nor tempted. "But I wasn't free. And more importantly, I don't want to be." "You're really happy here? With him? With this life?" "I'm really happy here. With him. With this life." She paused. "It's not the life I would have chosen at 16, but I choose it every day now. That's the difference." David tipped his hat and rode away. Emma watched him go with no regrets. That evening, Thomas found her in her flower garden, now quite extensive, with roses and lupines and daisies creating a riot of color against the practical backdrop of the ranch. "I saw you talking to young Rutherford," Thomas said. He was saying goodbye. "I'm not jealous," Thomas said, and Emma believed him. "Well, maybe a little, but mostly I'm grateful." "For what?" "That you stayed. That you keep choosing to stay." Emma straightened, dirt on her hands, flowers in her hair, looking nothing like the frightened child bride of 2 years ago. "Thomas, I need you to understand something. I don't stay because I have no other options. I stay because this is where I belong. This is my home. You're my family. This is my life, and I love it." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. They're what made me who I am." Thomas pulled her close, unmindful of the dirt on her hands or the impropriety of such displays in daylight. "I love you, Emma Dawson. I don't think I've said that enough. Or at all." "You haven't," I admitted, "but I knew anyway." "Well, I'm saying it now. I love you. Not as a replacement for what I lost, not as a solution to a problem, but as you, Emma, yourself, the woman you've become." "I love you too," Emma said, and realized it was completely true. "I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know what it felt like." They stood there in the flower garden, holding each other as the sun set over the Montana mountains, two people who'd been thrust together by circumstance and had somehow forged something real. That summer, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been sure until Doc Morrison confirmed it. Her first thought was terror. She was barely 18, already raising 4 children, and now she'd have an infant again. Her second thought was joy. This baby, unlike the others, would be theirs from the start. Not Margaret's children that Emma had inherited, not a baby born from duty or obligation, but a child conceived in love and wanted by both of them. When she told Thomas, he went pale, then red, then picked her up and spun her around the kitchen despite her laughing protests. "Another baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." The children had mixed reactions. Samuel, now almost 10, was mortified at the implications. Ruth, 8, was excited about having someone smaller to care for. Clara, nearly 6, wanted to know if they could name the baby Buttercup. Grace, toddling at 18 months, had no opinion but liked to pat Emma's still flat stomach. As Emma's belly grew through the fall, she found herself reflecting on Margaret, the sister she'd barely known as an adult, the woman's shadow she'd been living in. She understood Margaret better now, the loneliness of ranch life, the weight of constant childbearing, the feeling of being trapped in choices made for you rather than by you. But Emma also understood that she'd made different choices. When the walls closed in, she kicked them down. When duty became suffocating, she redefined what duty meant. She'd taken the hand she was dealt and played it differently.
In January, as Emma entered her 8th month, complications arose. She began bleeding lightly, not enough to be immediately dangerous, but enough to worry Doc Morrison. He ordered her to bed rest, which was nearly impossible with 4 children and a ranch to run. "I don't have time to rest," Emma protested. "You'll make time," Thomas said firmly, "or you'll lose this baby. Maybe lose yourself too. We're not taking that risk." He hired Mrs. Henderson from town to come help with the children. He took over every household task Emma normally handled. He even attempted to cook with disastrous but endearing results. Emma lay in bed, frustrated and fearful, feeling her body betray her just as Margaret's had betrayed her. "I'm scared," she admitted to Thomas one night. "I know. What if I die like Margaret did?" Thomas took her hand. "You're not Margaret. Your pregnancy is different. And if anything goes wrong, Doc Morrison will be here immediately. We're prepared this time." "But what if—" "No." Thomas's voice was fierce. "We're not entertaining that possibility. You're going to be fine. This baby is going to be fine. And I'm going to become insufferable with worry until you both are." Despite her fear, Emma smiled. "You're already insufferable. Then I'll become more so."
Emma went into labor on a cold February morning, 2 weeks before her due date. Thomas had Doc Morrison at the ranch within the hour. Mrs. Henderson took the children to her house in town, and Thomas, breaking every convention, stayed by Emma's side through the entire labor. "You shouldn't be here," Emma gasped between contractions. "I wasn't here for Margaret," Thomas said. "I'll be here for you." The labor was hard, but not dangerous. Emma was young and strong, and the baby was positioned correctly. As the pain mounted, Emma gripped Thomas's hand so hard, she later found she'd left bruises. "I can't do this," she cried at one point. "You already are," Thomas said. Just after dawn, Emma gave birth to a healthy son. He had Thomas's dark hair and Emma's stubborn expression. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold air and didn't stop until Emma held him against her chest. "He's perfect," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's ours," Thomas said, his own voice breaking. They named him William Thomas Dawson. William for Emma's grandfather, Thomas for his father. But from the start, everyone called him Will. Emma went into labor on a cold February morning, 2 weeks before her due date. Thomas had Doc Morrison at the ranch within the hour. Mrs. Henderson took the children to her house in town, and Thomas, breaking every convention, stayed by Emma's side through the entire labor. "You shouldn't be here," Emma gasped between contractions. "I wasn't here for Margaret," Thomas said. "I'll be here for you." The labor was hard, but not dangerous. Emma was young and strong, and the baby was positioned correctly. As the pain mounted, Emma gripped Thomas's hand so hard, she later found she'd left bruises. "I can't do this," she cried at one point. "You already are," Thomas said.
Just after dawn, Emma gave birth to a healthy son. He had Thomas's dark hair and Emma's stubborn expression. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold air and didn't stop until Emma held him against her chest. "He's perfect," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's ours," Thomas said, his own voice breaking. They named him William Thomas Dawson. William for Emma's grandfather, Thomas for his father. But from the start, everyone called him Will.
When Emma brought Will home, she worried about how the other children would react. Would they be jealous? Would they feel displaced? Instead, they were enchanted. Samuel held his baby brother with unexpected tenderness, promising to teach him to ride and rope. Ruth sang him lullabies and appointed herself his official guardian. Clara made him dandelion crowns and insisted he was the most beautiful baby ever born. Grace, now a sturdy 2-year-old, patted his head gently and said, "My baby." Thomas watched his family with an expression of complete contentment. "We're whole," he said to Emma one evening as they watched the children play with baby Will. "For the first time since Margaret died, no, for the first time ever, we're whole." Emma understood what he meant. This wasn't a family built from tragedy or obligation. This was a family they'd built together, deliberately, through choice and effort and love. On a warm summer evening, 2 years after Will's birth, the Dawson family gathered for supper, a chaotic, joyful meal with 6 children now, as Emma had given birth to twin daughters the
Previous spring. The twins, Sarah and Elizabeth, were 4 months old and utterly identical, except for Sarah's slightly louder cry. They sat in matching cradles by the table, taking turns fussing while the family ate. Samuel, now 12, was tall enough to help his father with the real ranch work. Ruth, 10, had become the household organizer, keeping track of schedules and chores with impressive efficiency. Clara, nearly 8, was the family artist, decorating every surface with drawings and wildflowers. Grace, 4 years old, was fearless and funny, with no memory of the complications surrounding her birth. And Will, 2.5, was into everything with the determined curiosity of a toddler. "Chaos," Thomas said, looking around the table with satisfaction. "Beautiful, perfect chaos." Emma, nursing Elizabeth while trying to eat her own supper, laughed. "This is your idea of perfect? This is my idea of family."
That journalist who'd come through years before returned that summer, now working on a book about women who'd built lives in the West. She sat on the Dawson porch, watching the controlled chaos of the household, and said to Emma, "When I interviewed you before, you said your story didn't end, it just kept going. Has that changed?" Emma looked out at the ranch, at Thomas teaching Samuel and Ruth how to read weather signs, at Clara and Grace picking vegetables in the garden, at Will toddling after them with fierce determination, at the twins sleeping peacefully in their cradles. "It's still going," Emma said, "but it's different now, fuller, richer." "Do you ever think about that 16-year-old girl who arrived here?" "Every day," Emma admitted, "but not with regret, more with compassion, I suppose. She was so scared. She thought her life was over. She had no idea it was just beginning." "What would you tell her if you could?" Emma considered. "I'd tell her that being given no choice isn't the same as having no power. I'd tell her that you can inherit someone else's tragedy and still write your own triumph. I'd tell her that the hardest thing she'd ever do would also be the most worthwhile." "And the truth that shocked everyone?" the journalist asked. "The one I mentioned in my first article about you?" Emma smiled. "The truth is still the same. A girl who was supposed to be a victim refused to be one. A marriage that started as a transaction became a partnership. Children who needed a mother got one who chose them. And a man drowning in grief found someone willing to swim out and save him." "That's beautiful," the journalist said. "It's also incomplete," Emma added, Because the real shock wasn't that I survived, or even that I thrived. The real shock is that I learned to be happy, genuinely, deeply happy, not despite my circumstances, but because I decided my circumstances didn't get to define me.
That September marked Emma's 6th wedding anniversary. 6 years since she'd arrived at this ranch as a terrified teenager. 6 years of transformation, struggle, growth, and love. Thomas had arranged a rare evening alone, Mrs. Henderson watching the children so he and Emma could have supper together, just the two of them. He'd set up a table in Emma's flower garden, now a magnificent sprawl of color and fragrance. Candles flickered in the gathering dusk. It wasn't fancy, but it was thoughtful, and it was theirs. 6 years, Thomas said, raising a glass of cider. Thank you for every one of them. Even the hard parts, Emma teased, especially those. They made us who we are. They ate slowly, savoring the rare quiet, talking about everything and nothing, about the children's futures, the ranch's expansion, the changes coming to the valley as more settlers arrived. Do you ever wonder, Thomas asked, what would have happened if James Wheeler had come back sooner, if Margaret had lived? Emma had wondered this too, though not often anymore. I think Margaret would have left eventually, she said honestly. She was too unhappy to stay. And you would have had to figure out how to raise 4 children alone. I wouldn't have made it, and Thomas said quietly, I was barely holding on when you arrived. You would have found a way. People do. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. He reached across the table and took her hand. You saved me, Emma. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too. You just don't realize it. You gave me a purpose when I had none. You gave me a family when mine had made it clear I was expendable. You gave me a place where I could become someone worth becoming. You were always worth it. Now, I had to earn that, and I did. We both did. As the stars came out over the Montana sky, they sat together in the garden Emma had built, in the life they'd created, surrounded by the evidence of their partnership. The thriving ranch, the happy children, the love they'd forged from obligation.
One evening that fall, Samuel approached Emma while she was putting the twins to bed. Aunt Emma, he stopped. Ma, can I ask you something? Emma had long since stopped correcting the children when they called her different things. To the older ones, she was sometimes Aunt Emma, sometimes Ma, sometimes just Emma. To the younger ones, she'd always been Mama. She answered to all of it. Of course, sweetheart. Do you remember my real Mama, your sister? Emma's hand stilled on Sarah's blanket. I remember her. Not as well as you do. I was only 15 when she married your father, and she moved away after that. But yes, I remember her. What was she like? Emma chose her words carefully. She was beautiful. She had your eyes, actually. And she was complicated. Most people are. She loved you children very much, but she struggled with finding happiness. Sometimes loving people isn't enough to make us happy. Sometimes we have to find that ourselves. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Ruth says she used to cry at night. She did, Emma confirmed. She was sad, Samuel. Not because of you or your siblings, not even really because of your father. She was just sad. It happens sometimes. Are you ever sad? Sometimes. Everyone is sometimes. But mostly, I'm happy. Very happy. Because of us? Emma pulled Samuel into a hug, this boy who was nearly as tall as she was now. Because of you. Because of your father. Because of this life we've built together. Because I get to be your ma, even though I'm really your aunt. Because I get to watch you grow into the man you're becoming. Samuel hugged her back fiercely. I'm glad Papa sent for you, even if it was sad at first. I'm glad you're here. So am I, Samuel. So am I.
Grace, now 5, had started asking questions about her mother, the mother she didn't remember. Emma had been dreading this conversation, but when it came, it was simpler than she'd feared. "Did Mama Margaret love me?" Grace asked one afternoon while helping Emma fold laundry. "Very much," Emma said. "She fought very hard to bring you into the world." "But she died." "She did." "And then you came to be our new mama." "Yes." Grace thought about this, her small face serious. "Mama Emma, am I different from the others? Samuel and Ruth and Clara remember Mama Margaret. Will and Sarah and Elizabeth only know you, but I'm in the middle." Emma knelt down to Grace's level. "You are in the middle, and that's special, Grace. You're the bridge between what our family was and what it became. You're the one who holds all of us together." "Really?" "Really. You were Mama Margaret's last gift to this family, and you're my gift too, because I got to choose to love you. Do you understand?" Grace nodded slowly. "Papa says he chose me too, even when he wasn't sure at first." Emma was surprised Thomas had been this honest with Grace. "He told you that?" "Last week. He said sometimes we don't know we love someone right away, but that doesn't mean the love isn't real when it comes." "Your papa is a wise man." "He is," Grace agreed seriously. Then, with the mercurial nature of children, she brightened. "Can I have a cookie now?" Emma laughed. "Yes, you can have a cookie." In October, a telegraph arrived from Emma's mother. Her father had died suddenly of a heart attack. Emma read the message 3 times, trying to feel something beyond numbness. She should be sad. He was her father. But he'd been the one to marry her off at 16 with barely a goodbye. He'd never visited. He'd never written except once to tell her about Caroline's wedding. Thomas found her sitting on the porch, the telegram in her lap. "What's wrong?" "My father died." Thomas sat beside her. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "I'm not sure I am." Emma looked at him. "Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you honest. He wasn't kind to you, Emma." "He did what he thought was right, what was expected. That's what everyone says. Duty, obligation, family responsibility." She crumpled the telegram slightly. "But he never asked what I wanted. He never considered that I might have a right to choose my own life. And yet here you are, and I'm grateful he sent you, even if his reasons were wrong." Emma leaned against Thomas's shoulder. "I won't go to the funeral. Is that wrong?" "It's your choice. That's what matters." Emma wrote to her mother, expressing sympathy and sending money. The Dawson ranch could afford the gesture now. But she didn't go home. She stayed where she belonged, with the family she'd built. Her mother wrote back weeks later, a hurt note, asking why Emma couldn't have come, why she'd chosen strangers over her own blood. Emma never responded. Some questions answer themselves. The winter Emma turned 20 was, paradoxically, one of the best seasons of her life. The ranch was secure financially. The children were healthy and thriving. She and Thomas had fallen into a rhythm of partnership that felt as natural as breathing. The twins were sleeping through the night. Life had found its balance. On Christmas Eve, the Dawson family gathered around their tree, a pine Thomas and Samuel had cut from the mountains, decorated with paper chains and popcorn strings the children had made. They had few store-bought gifts. Samuel got new boots he desperately needed. Ruth received a blank journal for her writing. Clara got watercolor paints. Grace got a doll Emma had sewn. Will got a wooden horse Thomas had carved. The twins got matching quilts Emma had pieced together. But the real gift was the evening itself. All of them together, singing carols, eating cookies, telling stories. Thomas holding Will on his lap while reading A Visit from St. Nicholas. Emma nursing Elizabeth while Sarah dozed in Ruth's arms. Samuel and Clara arguing good-naturedly about whether reindeer could really fly.
Grace dancing to music only she could hear. "This," Emma said to Thomas later that night, after the children were finally asleep, "this is what I chose. Not the big moments or the dramatic revelations, but this, ordinary, chaotic, perfect family life." "There's nothing ordinary about what you've built," Thomas said. "We've built," Emma corrected. "We've built together."
In early spring, a letter arrived addressed to Thomas. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the postmark from California. Thomas opened it at the breakfast table, read it, and went very still. "What is it?" Emma asked. "It's from James Wheeler." The name still had power to create tension in the room. Emma set down her coffee cup. "What does he want?" Thomas read aloud. "Mr. Dawson, I am writing to you from California, where I've made a life for myself. I've married, become a father, and tried to put the past behind me. But my wife, wiser than I deserve, has convinced me that some things need to be said. I wronged you. I wronged Margaret. I wronged everyone involved in that situation years ago. I was selfish and cowardly, taking comfort where I shouldn't have, then running rather than facing the consequences. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that your family is thriving now, that you've remarried, that your children are well. I'm glad. You deserved better than what Margaret and I gave you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I wanted you to know that I've carried the guilt for that time every day since, and I wanted to say what I should have said 8 years ago. I'm sorry. I hope you found peace and happiness. God knows you've paid enough for other people's mistakes. James Wheeler." The kitchen was silent. Even the children sensed something important was happening. Finally, Thomas folded the letter and set it aside. "He's right that he wronged us, but he's wrong about one thing." "What's that?" Emma asked. "He says I paid for other people's mistakes, but if Margaret hadn't died, if circumstances had been different, I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have this family. I wouldn't have this life." He looked at Emma. "I won't pretend the pain didn't happen, but I also won't pretend the outcome isn't good." "Will you write back?" Emma asked. Thomas thought about it. "Yes. I'll tell him I forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because holding on to anger is exhausting. And I'll tell him I'm happy, because I am." That afternoon, Thomas wrote his response. It was brief and honest. "Wheeler, you wronged us. You're right about that. But you also gave me a gift, though you didn't mean to. You taught me that running from problems doesn't solve them, and that the hardest situations can lead to unexpected grace. I'm not interested in maintaining correspondence, but I want you to know I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I refuse to let your mistakes have power over my present. My family is thriving, my children are happy, my wife is remarkable, my life is full. That's all you need to know. Go in peace. Thomas Dawson." He mailed it without ceremony, then came home and kissed Emma thoroughly, as if to remind himself where his real life was. On Emma's 21st birthday, the whole valley seemed to celebrate with her. It had become tradition. The young Mrs. Dawson, who'd arrived as a frightened 16-year-old, had become a figure of respect and even admiration in the community. Her birthday was an excuse for a community gathering. The neighboring ranches brought food, the town's women brought gifts. The children played while the adults talked. It was informal, joyful, and genuinely affectionate. Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd come prying years before, approached Emma with something that looked suspiciously like respect. "Mrs. Dawson, I owe you an apology." Emma was surprised. "For what?" "For judging you. When you first came here, I thought you were a child playing at being a wife and mother. I thought the whole arrangement was scandalous and doomed to fail." "Many people thought that," Emma said diplomatically. "But you proved us all wrong.
You've built something real here. You've raised those children with love and wisdom. You've made that ranch more successful than it's been in years, and you've done it all with grace and dignity." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "You've become the woman we all should have been at your age." Emma was moved despite herself. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the sun set on her 21st birthday, Emma stood on her porch, watching the celebration wind down. Thomas came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Dawson." "Happy birthday to me," Emma agreed. 21. Legally an adult now in every state of the Union. Emma laughed. "I've been an adult for years, Thomas. The law is just catching up." "Fair point, but now no one can question it." He turned her to face him. "You know what I realized today?" "What?" "You've spent nearly 6 years of your life building this family. You've given us your youth, your strength, your heart, and I've never properly asked you if you wanted more." "More what?" "More life. More choices, more opportunities. Emma, you're 21 years old. You could go to school, travel, see something beyond this valley. You don't have to spend your whole life on this ranch if you don't want to." Emma looked at him, this man she'd been given to, then chosen, then learned to love deeply. "Thomas Dawson, are you trying to get rid of me?" "Never, but I'm trying to give you options, real ones. You came here with none. You should know you have them now." Emma took his face in her hands. "I don't want to go to school. I don't want to travel. I don't want anything except this ranch, this family, this life with you. Not because I have no other choice, but because this is my choice. Every single day, I choose this." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Thomas kissed her then, in full view of anyone who might be watching, and Emma kissed him back without reservation or shame. This was her husband. This was her life. This was her choice.
Over the next few years, the Dawson family continued to grow and change. Samuel left for agricultural college at 18, determined to bring modern techniques back to the ranch. Ruth became a teacher in the town school, shocking everyone by insisting she could teach and help the ranch. Women could do both, she declared. Clara developed an unexpected talent for horse training. Grace grew into a confident, adventurous girl who feared nothing. Will became his father's shadow, learning every aspect of ranch management. The twins developed distinct personalities despite their identical faces. Sarah, quiet and contemplative, Elizabeth, bold and outspoken. And Emma, who'd arrived as a child bride at 16, became the matriarch of a large, successful, complicated, beautiful family. She was 25 when Samuel married a girl from his college and brought her home to the ranch. Emma watched her stepson, her first child in all the ways that mattered, start his own family, and felt the circle completing itself. "You're going to be a grandmother," Thomas teased her. "I'm 25, Emma protested, "and I'm 45, which means I'm definitely old enough to be a grandfather." "We started this family young," Emma admitted, "in every way. Do you regret it?" Emma thought about the question seriously. She did this periodically, examined her life to make sure she was living it intentionally, not just surviving it. "No," she finally said, "I don't regret it. It was hard. It still is sometimes. But it's mine. I made it mine. That matters." When Emma was 26, a young girl arrived at the ranch, brought by her desperate father. She was 15, pregnant, unmarried, and terrified. Her family was sending her away in disgrace. The father asked if Emma would take her in, let her stay until after the baby came. "I heard you were kind to people in difficult situations," he said awkwardly. Emma looked at this girl, just a year younger than she'd been when she'd arrived at this same ranch, just as scared, just as certain her life was over. "What's your name?" Emma asked gently. "Annie," the girl whispered. "Annie, you can stay as long as you need. No judgment, no shame, just safety and time to figure out what comes next. The girl burst into tears of relief. Over the next months, Emma helped Annie through her pregnancy, her birth, and her decision to keep her daughter and raise her alone. She taught Annie ranch skills so she could find work. She taught her how to hold her head high in the face of judgment. She taught her that one mistake, one difficult circumstance, didn't have to define a whole life. When Annie finally left the ranch with her baby daughter, secure in a job at a neighboring farm and ready to build her own life, she hugged Emma fiercely. "You saved me," Annie said. "No," Emma corrected gently. "I just showed you that you could save yourself. You did the rest." After Annie left, Thomas found Emma crying in the garden. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." Emma wiped her eyes. "I was that girl, Thomas. 10 years ago, I was that terrified 15-year-old who thought her life was over. And now I got to be for her when I needed back then. Proof that survival is possible, that starting from the worst place doesn't mean you can't end up somewhere beautiful." "You've become what you needed," Thomas said softly. "We all should," Emma replied. "We all should."
Emma Dawson stood on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now, with additional rooms for the ever-growing family, and watched the valley she'd come to love. She was 36 years old, mother to 6 biological children and stepmother to 4 more, grandmother to Samuel's 3 children and Ruth's newborn son, wife to Thomas, who at 56 was finally letting Samuel take over more of the ranch's daily operations. The young girl who'd arrived here 20 years ago felt like a different person, and she was. That Emma had been terrified, powerless, defined entirely by other people's choices. This Emma was strong, respected, the beating heart of a family and a community. She'd served on the school board, helped establish a lending library in town, and quietly assisted more than a dozen young women in difficult circumstances. She'd made the ranch profitable, raised 10 children to be decent humans, and built a marriage that had started as a transaction and became a true partnership. Her sister Margaret's portrait still hung in the main room, not hidden, not worshipped, just present. Emma had long since made peace with Margaret's ghost. They were different women who loved the same man in different ways. That was all. Thomas came out to join her, moving a little slower these days, but still strong, still present. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Emma said. "That girl who arrived here in a wagon, so scared she could barely breathe. The woman I've become. How one terrible situation became the foundation for something beautiful." "Do you think you'd change anything if you could go back?" Emma had been asked this question many times over the years. Her answer had evolved. "I'd want that 16-year-old girl to know she'd be okay. More than okay. I'd want her to know that the worst day of her life was actually the first day of her real life." Emma leaned into Thomas. "But change it? No. This life, this messy, complicated, hard-won, beautiful life, this is exactly what I want." From inside the house came the sounds of their family. Children laughing, the twins arguing about something, Will explaining ranch business to Samuel's oldest son, Grace singing while she cooked supper. "We built something good," Thomas said. "We did," Emma agreed. "Not despite the hard beginning, but because of it. Because we learned that you don't have to accept the hand you're dealt. You can play it differently. You can transform it. You can win anyway." As the Montana sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma Dawson stood in the home she'd built, surrounded by the family she'd chosen, living the life she'd created from the ashes of someone else's tragedy. The truth that shocked everyone 20 years ago was simple. A girl given no choice had chosen anyway. And in doing so, she'd written a story of triumph that no one,
least of all herself, could have predicted.
Years later, when Emma's granddaughter asked her what the secret to a happy life was, Emma thought for a long moment, then said, "There's no secret, darling. Just this. You can be handed a story you didn't choose and still decide how it ends. You can inherit tragedy and create triumph. You can start with nothing, no power, no choice, no hope, and build everything. The world will try to tell you who you are and what you deserve, but you get to decide that. Every single day, you get to decide that." I was given to a widowed rancher at 16 as a solution to someone else's problem. I could have stayed that solution. Instead, I became a woman, a wife, a mother, a force. That's available to everyone, that choice. Most people just don't realize they have it. But you do, sweetheart. You always do.